Great to see all of you. Thank you for coming to our panel that we're calling Digital Telepathy, where everything connects. My name is Karen Bartleson. I am the president of the IEEE. Raise your hand if you know what the IEEE is. Woohoo! All right. For those of my colleagues and friends and family that don't know what the IEEE is, I say to them, well, have you heard of something called Wi-Fi? Everybody goes, oh yeah. I said, well, the IEEE is the one that kind of created it and keeps it going, and so we're kind of all over the world, and we think we're kind of cool, and anybody who knows who the IEEE is also very, very cool. So are a lot of you developers, software engineers, hardware, any students out there? No students. So we're going to try to keep this not too technical, but we're going to have time after each of our panelists gets up and just talks a little bit about what digital telepathy means to them and the future. And then we'll have the mic up here, so I would love to have you guys talk with us instead of us just talking amongst ourselves. So don't be shy. If you have any questions at all, there's the mic, and we'll start probably about halfway through with audience participation. So this panel is called Digital Telepathy. And what it means is this incredible revolution, societal revolution, technological revolution that's going to be happening that will completely transform our lives. So kids today will not realize that the world looked any different than it does today. So it's probably the shock that our grandparents went through when electricity came into their homes. So I see this as going to be the biggest revolution, say, since the Industrial Revolution, and the world is going to change dramatically. Some people call this the Internet of Things. Some call it M2M, for man to machine. There's all kinds of terminology floating around because, again, this technology, this revolution is changing as we speak. So we're going to call it digital telepathy, which means people talking to things, on all of our devices that, how could we live without these? It's also things to things. Your refrigerator tells your car to go buy a loaf of bread. And also people to people. This is where some of the cultural revolutions are going to come in. So all of this together is what we're going to call digital telepathy. I've got three really smart and really cool guys here to talk about it. The first is Oleg. He is from STMicroelectronics. And believe it or not, he used to be a DJ, and then he became a technologist. So hopefully the DJ didn't leave him. That's kind of a neat thing to have. Next to him on the other side of the podium, which is kind of a weird setup to have the podium there. We want to just kind of walk around, but we're supposed to sit at the table. The next guy is Wael Diab. He's with Broadcom, and believe it or not, he's one of the world's most prolific inventors. He has 150, how many patents, Wael?
As of Tuesday, 137.
137 patents, so that's why I'm sitting way far down here, because I'm not worthy to sit next to him. He's actually a really, really nice guy. And then on the very end, we have Joe Weinman, and Joe is with a company called Telx. And when I asked Joe, tell me something really cool about yourself, he said, I have no hobbies, I don't watch TV, I actually spend all my time on cloud economics. And one of the other friends on the panel said, well, does she appreciate all the time you spend with her? So I think cloud economics and Joe are a couple made in heaven. Anyway, let's take a look at the big picture. So this is digital telepathy. So we're going to see all these kinds of changes in society, changes in technology. All of them actually are fueled by standards, and that's why I'm here as president of the Standards Association. So these things are all put together by something that normally puts people to sleep, but is actually pretty exciting if you're part of the standards arena. So we'll come back to these throughout the panel. Oleg, I'm going to let you start talking about some of these megatrends that we're going to see as the digital telepathy takes over the world.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I used to be DJ, so let's spin it. So what are the trends? Obviously, every one of us knows that energy cost is rising, and that is creating a tremendous impact on where we live and what we do. If you would look at everybody in our country, let's say 20 years ago, a desire to turn your thermostat up and down was virtually non-existent. Well, it's at a certain degree, as long as it's comfortable, who would think about you setting it 10 degrees lower? And today, if you look at the guys who build Nest thermostat that talks to your iPhone, it actually is something that is very useful and everyone is trying to use. So the energy cost that is rising is obviously impacting what we do as humans and what happens to us and how we interact with the devices. But this is actually not enough to make us to be compelled to interact with our thermostat. Thermostat is a great example of the device that we have in our home. So first, you think about thermostat growing a link with an iPhone or Android phone. And then, what can happen? Well, maybe some other devices, such as refrigerators and, let's say, your arm belt when you exercise, and maybe occupancy sensors in your room start talking to each other. But why is it so important? Well, the real interaction is not just in communication. We talk about Internet of Things, and Internet of Things in many of our minds is connectivity among everything. Well, it's not just the connectivity among the devices, it's connectivity between us and the devices. And that transcends across technology into the physiology and psychology. The reality of the matter is, when we start interacting with our environment, the interaction is something that needs to grow through not just a mechanical order, but also a feedback. If you think about our cell phones that today allow us to be tracked every moment of the day, and we can actually retrieve the data and talk about where we were yesterday, where we were 10 days ago, what store we stopped in front of, the same is applicable to what is happening in our smart homes. As our homes becoming smarter, location-based services within the home start to be driven by effectively our home knowing where we are in the room, who we are, trying to identify us by the face. And all of that is enabled by the convergence of these multiple domains. And if you think about smart cities, smart buildings, smart homes, connectivity is one of the enabling factors, of course. But what is even more so important is applications and ways of interactions that we're developing based on this enabling technology. And that's really what makes Internet of Things to connect with the Internet of People. And that's what we call digital telepathy. It's when our home can actually predict what we would like based on our previous experience, build usage patterns, and present to us something that we would like to hear or see or listen to, and depending on the time of the day, depending on our mood. What is, an example, my heartbeat today, what is my temperature. Based on all those factors, we can actually expect technology of the future to feed back to us the experience within our home. And this is a fundamental factor. This is a fundamental factor that changes technology from being capable of being useful to becoming really useful. This is a crossing of the chasm between something that is interesting, something that is potentially be useful, to something that becomes invisible but becomes a part of everyday life and what we do on our daily basis. So if you think about, as an example, as the Nest thermostat example I cited before, what does it do? It learns how we interact with it. It learns about the settings that we would like, and based on those settings, it provides us with changing temperature patterns within our home as we go forward. It's almost like, think about the Pandora of energy management. It's pretty much the same. It learns our response to certain environmental events and builds behavioral models. So I think as we move forward, digital telepathy will demonstrate itself and manifest itself not as much in connectivity and the ability to process something, but really in the ability to learn about us and us interacting with the environment through environment learning about us. That's kind of my 2 cents on it.
You know what I'm going to do when my home is really, really smart is I'm going to mess with it, right?
Of course.
You'll do these real habits, and then you'll think, it knows what you're doing, and then you'll just...
But that's the fun part, Notice how many times you probably have driven in your car with the GPS on and just take a wrong turn, just for the sake of her saying, it's a wrong turn, make left.
Exactly. All right. Wael, tell us what else this will mean in our everyday lives going forward.
We have this saying at work, where I work, it's we say from the hand to the home to the office. And I can tell you, like, one of the things I did when I walked up here is I gave my cell phone to one of my colleagues. And now I almost feel like I'm naked. I no longer am connected. I don't know what's going on. So we've gone very reliant on having technology in our everyday lives. And I think, as Oleg was saying, not only is it that we rely on it in the traditional ways, and as Karen was saying, it's going to be a revolution, we're now using it more and more to not only plan, but these devices can make decisions. So one of the ways to think about Internet of Things is we call vertical. So there are different aspects of our lives that we can look at. And this is an example, if you look at the slide, this is an example of just someone that's either at home, in their office, in their car, and they want access to the same information that they would be wherever they're at. And one of the things that, again, we talk about standards, sometimes we don't think about them. So Karen mentioned something called Wi-Fi, which everyone here knows. Another one that you might have heard of, how many people have heard the term Ethernet? So this year will be the 40th anniversary of Ethernet, which is IEEE 802.3. And while we may not see it everywhere, it's present in a lot of these connections in the background in the infrastructure. So that's one part of Internet of Things. It's connecting things. The second part, it's like Oleg was saying, it's interacting together. And the third part is to be able to make decisions. So if I show you by way of example, we go to the next slide. There's a this is one of the silos that's been covered quite a bit is healthcare, or the medical silo and medical vertical. So one of the standards in here is 11073. But standards and stuff aside, what's an example of how you can do this? So let's say you have an elderly person that might be living in a home that might have a heart condition. Well, traditionally, you might either need someone to stay with them at home to monitor them, or you might need them to stay in a hospital. By using technology, you can have them monitored. So as Oleg mentioned, you can look at things from temperature to, you can have sensors that might read their heart rate. But what's interesting here is now, let's say something was to happen. God forbid, there's an event that happens, an alarm might fire off. The information is now routed to a first responder. You can get a medical team out to the home, and they can be equipped as they come in, already knowing what's going to happen before they get to the person's home. If you think about that example for a second, that's quite important. We live in societies today that are changing. Not only is technology changing, but the demographics and the profile of society is changing. Everyone's getting older, so we have more of an aging population. So technology, in this case, can help deal with the fact that our demographics are changing in some of the developed countries.
Thanks, Wael. Raise your hand if you're not getting older. Hey, do you want to borrow my cell phone so you don't feel naked?
Yeah, actually. I don't know how much longer I can last without that.
Really? Having some withdrawal symptoms there. Joe, let's talk some more about, there were a lot of numbers on Wael's slides that represented something. What is that something and what's it all about?
So to give a little bit of background on all this stuff, just because the people in the audience seem to be pretty diverse. Imagine that 20 years ago you had heard about this thing called the World Wide Web and could kind of get in on the ground floor of it, right? It's a transformational capability, and back in '93 I don't think we were able to figure out all of the things like Facebook that would, all right, nice little vibration in here. Should I stop talking? Because I'm done with my slide. Okay, just turn off reverb and add in like some metal. So, it's hard to anticipate all the things like Facebook and Twitter that would have arisen at the time, or video conferencing over the web, etc. And I think that we're at the beginning of this major transformation into the next huge wave, which is this concept of the Internet of Things. And as Karen introduced early on, there are a number of trends, and we're kind of at the perfect storm of the confluence of these trends. And what's happening is processing is getting cheap, and everyone is always connected all the time, and things like wireless connectivity might have been $3,000 or $4,000 a few years ago, and now the chips are available for dollars, if not pennies. And so that can really help meet a lot of the challenges that we have. And as Karen mentioned in her introduction, she's president of the Standards Association of the IEEE, and standards are one of the absolute essentials to making all this happen. So to put it in ordinary context, if you just look up at the slide, anytime we have a basic human interaction, for example, a doctor talking to a patient, a lot of things happen, and they're so transparent to us because we're so used to them that you don't realize how much complexity there is in that. And everything has sort of this foundational aspect that's required for communication. So for example, we have to agree on the language we're going to speak in, right? If I am speaking French and you only understand English, then it's not going to be a very productive conversation. We have to worry about things like security. So a doctor has to have credentials and presumably has those credentials presented in some way, for example, a board certificate on the wall. We have to agree on word order. If, I said, my arm hurts after I twisted my leg, that's a very different meaning than my leg hurts after I twisted my arm, right? And the doctor needs to know that for the meaning to come across, or what's called the semantics of that dialogue. We need to have some sort of identification in the sense of not necessarily accreditation, but when the doctor prescribes something to me, Joe Weinman, that's very different than a prescription to somebody else, and we have to have the authentication around that. So all these basic elements that we take for granted, including also, by the way, privacy, right? We're in a doctor's office naked. We may or may not want everyone in the world to be walking by. And so we have sort of this secure area for the interaction to occur. So those are all either de facto standards or national standards or arguably open standards, right? We can choose to communicate, with phrases like, dude, yeah, I feel great, I'm okay, or don't tase me, bro, was the expression earlier today. And so if we move on to the computing context, if we expect to have that sort of basic interaction between humans, just translate that into the context of automation and the same types of things apply, right? We have to agree on protocols. So, various IEEE standards around Ethernet and Wi-Fi and some of the other standards that things like the World Wide Web Consortium and the Internet Engineering Task Force have worked on around things like the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Anytime you enter http:// into your web browser, it's the same as saying to someone in a foreign land where you say, would you mind if we spoke English, because my French is a little rusty, right? So you're agreeing upon the exact protocol that the rest of the conversation is going to have. Things like security are important. So encryption, privacy, either enforced through specific capabilities like encryption or also through national laws or international laws. So all of those things play a role and are just as important in helping this vision of the Internet of Things come about. And so we just go to the last slide to kind of focus a little bit on the importance of standards. Standards is not a new thing that we just came up with for this panel or for the internet or anything else. And a great example of old standards that have persevered over 2,500 years is the standards that were first devised for the first wide area network, which was the Roman road system in the Roman Republic. And there were standards there. There were standards on how you constructed a road, so a layered architecture. There were standards on width. There were standards on what today we would call multi-protocol class of service, namely military chariots were given, right-of-way over peasants or serfs and the, cargo ponies that might be carrying goods to market or whatever. And so those standards really helped facilitate the Roman dominance for 800 years, helped facilitate the flow of information, because of course, those days you couldn't go on Twitter or Facebook, so you actually had to shave somebody's head, write something on their skull and wait for the hair to grow back. That was encryption at the time, right? So all of those things together, really have persevered, and even today, those highways are still in use. And the fact that best practices were engineered into the standards about how to ensure that there was a little bit of curvature so that rain would fall off of it, all that stuff really demonstrates the importance of standards that 2,500 years later, you're still using them. So people want to get them right, and as a result, there's a whole set of best practices. And I'll just put a plug in for what the IEEE is doing in conjunction with the W3C and the IATF and a couple of other bodies. If you go to open-stand.org, which is sort of open standards and taking a stand for open standards, There's sort of a statement of principles around the importance of openness in standards and kind of a manifesto for making them all work, which includes things like respectful collaboration. So with that, just a little, aside on the importance of standards and making the Internet of Things happen.
Standards and the pieces together that connect everything in this world of Internet of Things or digital telepathy, and then all the medical applications, and then all the way up to major megatrends changing what we're experiencing. So I'm going to open up the floor. So if you want to ask a question, please step up to this microphone. And in the meantime, there's always a burning question about the Internet of Things, and we want to address that right away, and that's privacy and security. Because we hear this all the time. Is my smart meter spying on me when it's measuring my electricity? What about who I am, my credit card information, my DNA, who I am as a human being, if my home is tracking my every movements? What does that mean to me as a human being? And there's a quote up here from the European Union Commission. They're talking about enterprise and industry, and it said, legislation simply cannot keep up with the pace of technology. And I would venture to say this has always been true. Technology jumps way out there, and then the lawmakers have to say, well, what is it that we should be doing about these amazing technological advances? So, Wael, why don't we start with you, and tell us, is the Internet of Things going to ruin our privacy? Are we at risk, or what's happening to keep us human and safe?
I certainly hope not. I live in San Francisco and I live in a condominium, so every once in a while, it's funny the number of times that you hear exactly what Karen said, is my smart meter going to be spying on me? I think the thing to keep in mind is a lot of these issues that come up, like security and privacy, they're very valid issues, they're very important issues, but they're also issues that have existed with telecommunication and technology for a while. So the key thing is, it's sort of, as we think about this problem, so long as we think about privacy and security up front, then it's just one more constraint as we engineer a solution to this to take it into account. And there's plenty of tools that we can use, and we have used. So today, when, for example, if you have broadband to your home, many companies will allow you to work from home. And there are different levels of security and privacy that you can employ. Everything from a very simple VPN. How many people in the room have ever used a VPN? There you go, virtual private network. So I remember the discussions when Ethernet, so I serve as the vice chair of 802.3, which is Ethernet. When we went into the access area, the number of people that said, you can't do this, you gotta be very careful because security is an issue. Well, there's a solution. VPN is an example. And there are more complex things. One of our colleagues on the corporate advisory group mentioned that their company allows you to bring your own device into work. And one of the things they do is they segment how the processing works and where the programs can reside in memory. So the good news is we have lots of solutions for these problems. We just need to consider them up front. And I think sort of the same way we're highlighting it, I expect that whatever we do in this space, we're gonna be thinking about this.
Oleg.
Let me just add to it. When we talk about privacy and security, I think we need to separate those two, because when we talk about security, there are tools and methods that can protect our data, and of course there are hackers and so forth, but at least to a reasonable degree we can ensure that the data can be locked in a safe place. But when it comes to privacy, that's a very interesting element. Just recently I was speaking at one of the events related to smart metering in Germany, and somebody says, well, how do we protect privacy? And my response to that started with a question. Privacy, what is it? In today's world, if you think about your smartphone pretty much is capable of tracking your movement every time. If you use Google Now, as an example, conveniently at certain times of the day it will pop a message, time to home is so many minutes. Or in the morning it will advise you that it's time to go to work and the traffic jam on the road would probably cause you 10 minutes delay. Well, somebody knows about your behavioral patterns. Yesterday there was an interesting panel where the issues of our identity, our DNA through the behavioral patterns was examined. It is something that cuts directly into our privacy. If somebody out there can collect data that essentially represents behavioral model of us, you know what, this is even more private than our iris pattern or our fingerprint. This is something that is even more private than DNA, because this what tells somebody about us. It tells what we like, what we dislike, what can be a predictable behavior, what can be unpredictable behavior. So when we talk about privacy and Internet of Things, it is a conscious decision that we will all have to make as the society, as consumers, as individuals. Where do we want to turn the dial? The convenience that can be enabled through essentially allowing the cloud and the Internet of Things to know about us is great, because you know what? I like the feature of my phone telling me how much a delay is on my way home. I love it. It's perfect. I mean, it tells me that maybe I should stay at my office for the next 10 minutes, let the traffic dissipate. It's very convenient. But then it's a conscious decision that you need to make, and we'll have to make as a society. And where's the dial needs to be turned? You know, how much of the data about ourselves, about our behavioral patterns, we would like to expose, and how much of it we would like to keep private? It's a very complex issue, and I'm absolutely in agreement with Karen. It is something that hasn't been yet embraced by the lawmakers, and probably it will take them a lot longer before we actually get at the point where all the data about us is exposed, which is an interesting conundrum.
I've heard it talked about as the balance between convenience and privacy, and what is it that we want as a society. Question?
Sure. I'm curious, you know, Nest is often cited as a really good example, and obviously one that's pretty mainstream, but I'm curious for the three of you, and we talked a little bit about the healthcare piece, but for the three of you, what is the most exciting kind of on-the-verge technology that you're seeing coming, and frankly, how far away is the one that you're most excited about? Because a lot of times we hear these things, and they're kind of highlighted as prototypes and down the road, but I think it's really most exciting when these things can get in our hands or at our companies, and feeling like they're years away really kind of saps the excitement about it. So I'd be interested to see what you guys are excited about, and how soon we'll be able to see and touch those.
Yeah, that's intriguing. So Joe, yeah.
I have something I have to tell you that is mind-blowing, that actually IEEE Spectrum did a cover story on Internet of Things in the February issue. So I actually finally got to it, and this is mind-blowing. So obviously, when we think about the Internet of Things, one of the applications is healthcare, as Wael went into some depth on. And when we think about healthcare, there are all these things out there like wearable sensors and slippers that will, you know, detect your gait. They've had that for a few years, and you know, presumably blood pressure monitors, etc. So there's beyond the Internet of Things is something called the Internet of Nano Things, which is picture, you know, nanoparticles that are floating through your bloodstream and then doing various things like checking for, you know, the same thing that your body will do, for example, the presence of invading pathogens as an example. So these nanoparticles or nanosensors need to be nano-networked, and they're talking about a couple of different ways to do it. And one of the obvious things, this is not the mind-blowing part yet, one of the obvious things to do is to have nano antennas on the nano sensors that then communicate to a micro gateway, and that's kind of what you would expect, right? You build this really small radio and you do some power scavenging in the blood to kind of power it up, and you send these terahertz signals just, you know, a little bit, you know, farther away, and then from there move up to a gateway. So what they're talking about doing, and they have a number of different ways that they think they can do it, is actually using the same biological mechanisms that the body uses right now, or known in biology, to occur. So for example, using viruses or bacteria that are carrying encoded DNA messages is, you know, one example. Also using neural networks to be able to do it as well. So the idea would be, picture you have all these little nanosensors floating through your body, and then they're actually generating their own coded DNA messages that are then diffusing through your bloodstream till they get to this micro gateway that then converts them to a radio signal that then talks to your smartphone and says, you know, oh my God, Joe just got the flu, or cut his finger, or whatever. It's just that thinking about biological means of data networking, to me, is the most amazing technology coming down the pike.
That sounds cool. We'll get the question from you guys in a little while, but I'd love to hear from the audience.
I'm actually from Harlem. One of the things I actually work on is Internet of Things stuff, and I was interested in your comments about standardization, and in particular about how IEEE and IETF and all these things would fit together. what we found when we were trying to work on a lot of this, and we were working on an approach that's physical layer independent, so it's not specific to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or CPU Z-Wave. We decided that the only way we thought we could actually standardize it is by open sourcing the implementation of it. So we have this project called AllJoin that we're actually going to see, to answer your question, I expect to see products this year using it. How do you see the IEEE, W3C, and other standards bodies playing this role? Because what we've seen is sort of vertical approaches being taken in things like the Connected Car Consortium and the Smart TV Alliance, and I'm wondering how that stuff is all going to flatten out, because I think all those things have to interoperate.
They definitely do. Wael or Oleg?
Actually, this is a very good question, because the reality of the matter is, you're right, there are many verticals that today spawn out, and it's much easier to manage certain things than verticals. But we need to be cognizant of the fact that one device that we all share is our smartphone, and this is our window into our smart city, smart home, smart environment, smart grid, smart anything, smart health, and anything that we can imagine. And all of those applications are converging. So I think one of the roles that IEEE can play, and we actually started this activity just recently by pulling together folks from Home Gateway Initiative, from Artemis Internet of Energy Project in Europe, from a bunch of other activities, and we started talking about what is needed in order to kind of lay the roadmap into the future and try to create convergent network. And that could end up being new standards, it could be end up an implementation guide, but certainly the industry as a whole, from multiple angles, from multiple verticals, feels that there is a need for something that becomes more overarching. And there are some activities in some pockets of developments that you can see today in open source community, you see in unification verticals, but I don't think it's enough. And this is a huge subject that needs to be addressed, and I think IEEE has a great opportunity to play a very important role in that.
The previous question was intriguing too. What technologies do you see coming in the future? So I'm going to let Wael answer that. Because he had some burning visions.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to compliment. I thought I really liked what Joe said. It's very exciting. But I wanted to compliment it by talking about something maybe not as sexy, but it's more immediate. So to me, I don't look at Internet of Things as being a discrete step. It's more of a continuum. We've got a lot of technologies already in existence today that we're starting to deploy. So I think Oleg talked quite a bit about smart meters and doing that. I'll give you a slightly different example. So if you look at data centers, which have been growing in terms of deployment and energy consumption over the last decade, I think in 2000 they were a negligible amount of power consumption. By 2005, they were about 1% of all human energy consumption. 2010, it was about 1.5%, and I believe the numbers come from a professor that looked at these in Stanford. Yeah. So it's growing quite a bit, and one of the things that if our machines get smarter, our telecommunications get smarter, one of the impacts is we can be more efficient at how we use energy. Because this problem is not going to get smaller, it's only going to get bigger. So what we want to do is, it's called energy proportionality. You want to be able to only use energy when you're actually processing or transmitting information. And we're already doing things in that area. We already have standards that help us have the telecommunication links behave more proportionally to the data transmitted, and therefore extrapolate that to be able to power down equipment. As this starts to spread more through what you're doing on the client side with something that you're holding in your hand, or as Oleg noted earlier, by understanding people's behaviors, that can now go end to end through the network, and we can get more energy efficient usage. But the point of the example is that it's not something that you have to wait for in 10 years. It's already happening today. And the level of intelligence and the level of pervasiveness is only going to increase. And I think that's true for all the different verticals, including medical.
Thanks. And let's round out that one question, and Oleg, answer about what you think the future technologies are.
Well, actually, I would like to build on what Wael had said. Yes, absolutely, we can find a lot of very intriguing, very mind-blowing technologies. But you know what? In my opinion, there is a gap that exists today between technology and applications that it is used for. If we look at Nest in your example, in your question. Yes, it is very much open-sided device, but what really makes it unique? The technology that it uses, components that are inside of this device are not cutting-edge components. So those are actually quite old components. But what makes this device cutting-edge and revolutionary is the fact that there is an application software that runs inside of it and does something with the data that is collected. And I think what we'll see as the new technologies that will create a lot of mind-blowing shifts in how we use what we use today in our hands is actually application software. Because yes, we have great communication technologies. Will they become even better? Of course. We have great processing power and it will only increase. But what we don't have yet today is we haven't harnessed the full potential of this communication network and the ability to gather the information from multiple sensors and process it in the applications. Just look at what we started seeing in our TV sets and smart TVs. Gesture recognition is just becoming to be the thing. We have the technology that allows us to identify faces and distinguish users by their facial features, but applications that harness it and use it are just in their infancy. So I think what we will see as the next wave is a huge development in the area of applications that reside on small intelligent devices and really transform the functions into something brand new that we haven't seen before.
Joe, I would really like if you would tell everybody what you think the implications on our infrastructure are going to be.
I've got a question that goes along with that, actually.
I'm sorry, I didn't even see you get up. Please.
The question is, do you guys have an opinion on the economic models that are going to support this? So, for instance, I walked in the room and took my iPad out to get on the Wi-Fi, and it took me 30 minutes to get on the South by Southwest Wi-Fi network, which tells me there's a capacity issue. And that's just the amount of people we have in this room. So imagine if everybody here had the Internet of Things going. What's the economic driver to support the infrastructure of this, the physical layer, to make that happen? Because it seems like we've got the technology, we have the ideas, we have the application ideas, but there's no incentive right now for somebody to build out a physical network to support that.
So I'll actually, if I can answer in two parts. So I'll answer your question and I'll follow with yours, and it's actually a very long answer, but I'll condense it to a short answer. You're not going to like the long answer, or most people in the room won't like the long answer. So to start with the first thing on implications of network infrastructure, to me that's a fascinating challenge for all this stuff, and I think there's a lot of perceptions people have that may or may not be correct about what the implications of the Internet of Things are, and I think maybe the answer is that there's no easy answer. It's shades of gray around what this is going to look like. So I'll give you an example. There's this thought that when we move to the Internet of Things, all of the transactions are extremely small, low bandwidth transactions. And a classic example is RFID, where you're in effect tracking soup cans and you just want to know it's soup can number 47, which is 96-bit identifier. When you add in it's Campbell's and it's chicken soup and it was manufactured on this date and all this stuff. So you say, well, okay, so you're tracking a pallet of soup cans and bam, you get 500 or however many soup cans are in a pallet, 96-bit messages, and that's not really a lot. It's nothing compared to a VoIP call. But what's interesting is it's the traditional network architecture was inside out. It was ABC, CBS, and NBC with I Love Lucy, etc. Single radio tower going out to 100 million viewers. This now reverses that and makes it be a lot of things coming from the edge back into the center with lots of small transactions. And so you start to get into things like the power overhead just to set up a session to be able to send a little bit of a transaction in. But actually there's other types of applications that are also in the Internet of Things category, and at the other extreme from things like tracking soup cans or smart meters saying here's my current, my air conditioner is on or not right now. You've got video, which as everyone knows is the hugest driver of bandwidth, and it's not just video conferencing but also things like ambient video where you're doing, let's say, smart city sensing where you've got video cameras on every intersection looking for murders or terrorists or whatever might be the case. And that's, of course, an immense amount of bandwidth. So I think, the situation is mixed where you have lots of bandwidth in, maybe lots of bandwidth out for things like digital signage, and everything in between as far as high volume, low volume, etc. to answer your question around the economics of it, I'm an old telco guy, so I was at AT&T for 30 years and I have kind of that mindset around things, but I did a very abstract paper called The Market for Melons, which is a play on a Nobel Prize winning paper called The Market for Lemons by George Akerlof. And he talks about market failure in a very simple case, which is easy to understand, which is someone who's trying to sell a used car. And basically, the seller knows whether or not the car is a peach or a lemon. In other words, the car has been only driven on Sundays to church, right? Versus, in 50 accidents. But the buyer doesn't know that. And so there's asymmetric information, and therefore the buyer won't pay more than the expected value of the car on average because the buyer doesn't know what he or she is getting. So there's actually sort of the inverse of that problem, which is instead of the uncertainty of quality, it's the uncertainty of quantity. And so you can look at flat rate versus pay-per-use plans, and there are behavioral economic cognitive biases around those flat rate plans. Everybody loves them because nobody wants to get a phone bill at the end of the month that's like, you accidentally made a call while you were in Canada and you now owe us $200,000. Right, but on the other hand, flat rates lead to inefficient allocation of resources because you have what's called moral hazard, which is, if they're handing out, chocolate bars at the, reception or drinks, they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll, order a drink. Let me try these 5 things I've never had before. And you sip them, I don't like this. You sip them, I don't like that. And so you just, use all care because you're rationally incented to not care. So what that all boils down to, which is the answer that most people in this room won't like, and I did a piece on this for the inimitable gigaohm.com a year or so ago on the implications of metering on broadband. And so the point is that there is no better way to rationally allocate resources than pay per use, right? Otherwise you end up with this moral hazard issue. And if that's the case, then you need to kind of pay for what you use, but when you don't know how much you're going to use, then you have all these challenges, which is you don't want to get that $250,000 phone bill at the end of the month. And that's not a made-up number. There's actually a case of a woman whose brother traveled to Canada for 2 weeks, downloaded some videos, and got a $200,000 plus bill. So, ultimately what it means is you've got to rationalize investment in network infrastructure and the people who are doing that with the ability to monetize that, which gets into all these thorny policy issues. I know I've already overspoken, but things like net neutrality and, what the ITU is working on right now as far as broadband as a fundamental human right. It's, maybe a fundamental human right, but who's going to pay for that right? And you can't have capitalism coexist with, we're just going to invest forever hundreds of billions of dollars to make sure everyone can look at laughing or sleeping cats.
But that's exactly why, so I think the question is, there's a situation here where you have a lot of demand and not enough supply. It's a very basic economic problem. And I think, Joe, you've detailed a lot of the different billing models that can happen. But I think the main thing that's going on is we have a situation where demand and supply don't match. So in most cases where this happens, supply will catch up. I think the difference is that in what has traditionally been broadband, it's been in a very simple type of model. So I don't know what the exact solution is in terms of a billing structure that you come up with, but what I do know is we are actually seeing lots of innovation in this space. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one, so we have a project that's in 802.3 ongoing right now called EPOC. This is Ethernet Passive Optical Networks over coax. So if you're familiar with some of the northern countries, some of the countries in Asia, they have massive build-outs in optics, and being able to share the fiber can give you higher bandwidth. What we have in the United States, as one of the distribution systems, is coax, but we would like to be able to have the same protocol, so we can have systems where we can move from cases. That's work that's ongoing right now. There's a tremendous amount of interest from both, North American as well as non-North American major service providers. And there are many other examples like that that are going on. The other thing that's happening is, as we go into IoT, there's more than one way you can connect your device. And that's one of the things that you see. For example, one of the things that you see when you go into major airports that are quite busy is that the airport may, or someone at the airport may help sponsor free Wi-Fi, because that helps offload some of the network congestion that you get on the cellular network. We have things like femtocells that are coming out. So there are many different things. So because there's this gap between the demand and the supply, and especially when it comes to the infrastructure, because it does take longer to build this stuff out, we are seeing innovation come into play. And what I think is going to happen is, I completely agree with Joe, that the typical model may or may not last. People are going to look for different ways to build. It may be service-oriented, it may be pay-as-you-play, and it's going to drive better allocation of resources. But for me, I think that's what's actually creating the innovation. That's what's creating a bunch of new standards in this space as well.
I think there are three aspects that we need to look at. First of all, viable business models supporting additional build-out of the networks with higher capacities, right? That's something that is without a doubt a driver. If there is a viable business model, there is business opportunity, the bandwidth will be increased. The other part of it is, what you mentioned, you couldn't get on Wi-Fi to log in. Probably the problem was not the Wi-Fi itself, the problem was accessing the server that authenticates and allows you to get online. And I think that's where we need to understand that as we move forward, we will see convergence of the networks. As an example, we just approved in IEEE-SA the first of a kind convergent network standard that allows you to combine networks over power line, networks over Wi-Fi, networks over cable as one, and over Cat5 as one unified network. So from an application point of view, you just see one interface capable of carrying IP traffic. The name of the standard is IEEE 1905.1. But in that convergence layer, it will decide which network to use. So in your scenario, imagine that you would have had the ability to go either through the cellular network or through the Wi-Fi to the authentication server. That probably would allow you to get on the network much easier, and then use local bandwidths. And the third aspect is, we need to start thinking about not only vertical communication, from the sensor to the cloud, so to speak, but also horizontal. And data reduction through the horizontal communication is a very important element that will take a lot of mind share as we develop an Internet of Things. Specifically, let's take two examples. We talked about video surveillance data. Yes, of course, if we would pipe all of this video surveillance data back to the data center, there is no network in the world we can build that would allow us cover the whole town. It's impossible. But once we start thinking about data reduction as an example, being able to recognize facial expressions, and unless there is an expression of fear, there is no reason to generate the alarm, all of a sudden the amount of data that we need to transmit becomes very small, and something like that will happen. The second example that I would like to cite in that direction is a smart home. Yes, of course, we can pipe all of the data to utility, and utility knows how much our solar panels are producing, how much our washer and dryer is consuming, how much electric car is charging, and based on that will give us demand response data. Guess what? If we'll try to do something like that, I don't even know what kind of pipe utility needs to build in order to support this data, and what kind of processing infrastructure will have to be created. It's impossible, and logistically unmanageable. But if you think about your home as an island that has communication among the intelligent devices inside, and distributed intelligence that is in a car charger, in LED lamp, in your meter and your thermostat and your energy management system, and they all can talk to each other. And that's what I mean, the importance of the application. And they have intelligent applications running on this platform that allows the devices to figure out, okay, a cloud is passing by, I don't want to draw more energy from the network, so I can probably dim some of my LED lamps, and I can probably create rules how to dim those bulbs. Or maybe I can throttle back the charging in my car. So all of that will come together. So those three aspects we need to examine when we talk about data aggregation and what kind of infrastructure we need.
So just to build on something that Oleg and Wael said, I think one of the interesting things about all this stuff is the opportunities for optimization. And the point is that traditionally things have been built on, let's call it a dumb basis, where you just kind of put it out there and you hope for the best, right? You have an air conditioner, and the air conditioner runs when you say for it to run, and then it doesn't run when you say for it not to. And then thermostats came along, and now you have sort of adaptive thermostats, and you can apply that to anti-lock braking systems, and you name it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity as the cost of processing comes down to be able to leverage a little bit of processing for a very large result. And one of the things that comes to mind is around supply chain logistics, which I'd love to talk about, the point that if you look at delivery trucks, like for UPS or FedEx, in the old days, they would just be sort of sent out on a route, and you'd say, well, here, go ahead and go do this. And now, what you can do is use 3G gateways on the trucks, or 4G now, mobile devices with GPS, determine exactly the location of each of your delivery trucks. Also to know exactly where the customers that need those deliveries or need, let's say, field support are, and also to know real-time traffic conditions based on a variety of techniques, including aggregate processing of where mobile phone signals are coming, as well as video surveillance on the highways. So when you put all that together, what it means is that you can, in real time, especially coupled with the cloud, do processing that says, we're going to send the truck left at this intersection instead of right at this intersection, because that'll mean that they can get to this customer faster. So the point is that a little bit of processing and intelligence, when coupled with additional data that's available through the Internet of Things type of sensors, can lead to optimization that reduces fuel costs and things like that. Do we have any more questions?
Great. Hi. Hi.
I just forgot my question to walk up here. Oh my God.
Is it going to be to harangue me about?
It is not about to harangue you, Joe. Oh, it was about programming. So right now, a lot of the ways we program things like Google Now or things that react are if this, then that. When we start thinking about everything in this room trying to meld into some sort of higher level of telepathy, consciousness, whatever, we don't have time for everything to go up to the cloud and be like, oh, I just found this, now what do I do? And then for it to come back, and then do it. Especially if we want things to start working together. So are there efforts or things happening right now on the programming side to kind of make this a little bit more responsive, maybe at the local level as opposed to in the cloud? I don't know.
Certainly. And that goes back to what I mentioned before about image analytics. When we talk about surveillance as an example, you're absolutely right. We don't have the time to go with everything to one central point and process it there. So there are developments today that essentially are part of silicon components, and you will see a lot of announcements like that coming pretty soon from many companies, including STMicroelectronics, where I work, where sensors effectively enable image analytics to be done locally. It can be processed right on the spot. And I think that's what needs to happen. But I think the issue is even more global. It's not just how we program it, how we process the data. And you see a lot of mentioning of singularity here, and that's where I would like to agree with Ray Kuzdale, is that parallel processing, pattern recognition is something that will drive how we perceive data, how we process data, and what we do with it going forward.
Just
Go ahead, I'll go after you. It's your turn. Okay. I was just going to say, I'll keep it short. I think it's not a new problem. So the idea of whether it's central or distributed processing has existed for a while. And we tend to keep oscillating between these different models, depending on what the constraints are. So I've had I think I had a professor once in college that said, it's the same problem, it just keeps reasserting itself.
So it's not central or distributed processing, it's thinking of a new way to tell computers what to do all at once, or have devices talk directly to each other.
So I think
it's more like telling the process, it's programming.
So I actually still think it's
Okay.
whether it's central or distributed, and we have the same problem with networking, whether you do edge routers or you do central routers. Where you draw the line in terms of what the programming is or what the hardware is and how you segment it, that changes depending on the problems. And I think, Oleg's point, for example, of okay, we can have more intelligent sensors, they can have more processing. Joe's point earlier that the processing is getting cheaper. That lets us do more at the local level. I think what you're talking about, your point is, okay, well, what if I could get all the devices within a domain to talk to each other? Sure, you can now set up a more intelligent decision-making process where you don't actually have to go all the way back out to the cloud all the time. But I think it's still, to me, it's how you draw these circles of what the domains are, or the decision-making process. One thing I do think that's different than that's happened before is I think those circles get drawn more dynamically as opposed to being very fixed, which is I'm going to work on a remote terminal, I have a central computer somewhere, or I have a bunch of servers. Now I could say, okay, I'm given what application I'm in, what resources are around me, what sort of decisions can I make now, and how can the software help me do that? And how often do I actually need to leave this domain to get more information? And I think that will also translate back down to not only speed of making decisions, but also how much energy you take to do that. Because the minute you leave the local domain, the further you have to go to be able to answer a question and do some processing, the more energy you spend.
So I have a multi-component answer to build on those two answers, which is you're certainly onto something very critically important. And I'm going to start actually from the cost perspective. So cars now have 70 microprocessors that are completely unnetworked to anything in the cloud. Obviously, it's going to change with connected vehicles, but before any of that was under discussion, you still have those various systems that are interacting with each other to make sure that everything works fine. So there's a lot of local, sort of adaptive, intelligent processing. The second thing is if you look at the cost trends for various components of a distributed computing architecture, everything is dropping in price. But processing and storage are dropping faster than networking, and so you end up with the fact that, you know, in the limit, any distributed computing transaction is 100% network cost because everything else is in effect free in comparison. So that provides you strong incentives, and that's before we get into other issues like latency for network. To your point, you know, you don't want to have, you apply the brake and then it's like, sorry, our servers are busy before it actually it makes things happen. But the second part of the answer to your point is we need a lot more intelligence and the ability to do the right thing. And so there's some really interesting work going on, but a lot of it is still exploratory in this arena. So I'm going to point to two things, that both of which are recent on top of my mind. So one is IBM Watson. So 3 days ago, I saw a great presentation on Watson used for healthcare. And, you know, Watson is pretty amazing technology, still in its infancy. Obviously, it's going to be a few more years before it turns into Skynet. But in any event, the point is that it's still doing fairly unintelligent statistical processing, right? And there's a whole line of thought that says you don't need intelligence if you have statistics because you can just kind of look at patterns and then adapt accordingly. But I personally believe that you need intelligence in addition to this kind of thing. So
we're out of time.
60 seconds. So the observation is, first of all, that you need to have that degree of intelligence, and it's been dismal, right? 50 years of AI has gotten nowhere. That said, there is work going on in combining a variety of process models and the Internet of Things and sort of data models for that. Again, the new IEEE Spectrum Fib ratio has a whole article on exactly how they're doing it, but the problem is that you have to have a lot of context-sensitive expertise. You can't just sort of make general lessons about anything. You've got to really model everything in depth and then maybe, you know, evolutionarily adapt it through things like neural networks. I'm done.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys. I want to thank the audience, and before you leave, I want to invite you to a special event we have going on this afternoon. It's a meetup with Tim Berners-Lee, and I think you all know who he is, the inventor of the World Wide Web. It's at 3:30 over at the Driscoll Hotel in the Driscoll Ballroom, so come by and you can actually shake his hand and listen to him speak about all kinds of things. So please join us, and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of South by Southwest.